Hello and welcome to Redwood Wonk, coming to you from the north coast of California. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined this week by co-host Aaron Donaldson. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Right on. Yeah, this is like Dream Team. It's typically co-host between myself and Eric, but often you and I get to chat and we get a little bit of a different angle here.
hmm
We talk about the political events, national political events, and kind of a little bit about the impact that we think you might not be hearing in the other news sources. We give it our own little unique flair, and I love kicking it with you. So let's dive right into our first topic. Our first topic this week is the Federal Appeals Court calls the Biden administration vaccine mandate a fatally flawed and staggeringly overbroad order. For context, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit issued an opinion last Friday evening reaffirming the decision to pause on the implementation of the vaccine requirement. So the court's quotes that kind of stood out to me that I think I've seen repeated in other places: a one-size-fits-all sledgehammer that makes hardly any attempt to account for differences in workplaces and workers. And the Biden administration kind of pushed back that said, like, hey, if we this pause needs to be lifted because this would delaying our implementation would cost dozens or even hundreds of lives per day. So the court says, well, no, actually, your system that you want to put in place to require private businesses to vaccinate everyone with more than 100 employees would have to vaccinate everybody, or they would have to get tested on a weekly basis to enter the workplace. And then those unvaccinated people would also have to wear masks in the workplace. The court says that is fatally flawed and staggeringly overbroad and raises serious constitutional concerns. But we have to take that with a grain of salt because this court is known as being at least one of the most most conservative in the country, and so that's a place where the plaintiffs would get the best odds of getting this delay of the order. So the attorney generals, the Republican attorney generals of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Utah, as well as several major employers in those states, have all basically contested this. And so what are they contesting exactly? They're contesting the OSHA requirement under their emergency authority that the labor secretary has the right to determine if there's a grave danger to the health of workers. So that's the threshold. And we'll talk about, does the order meet the threshold, or what do we think is going to happen as this works its way through the courts? But give me a little bit of your feedback about what you think about the federal ruling so far.
I think it's just a really fascinating conversation about the power of the federal government. It's really one of the first times that we have seen a pandemic of this scale with a vaccine available that really tests the government's ability to do something so broad. And as you mentioned, the court said that it was like a one size fit all. It was like a sledgehammer. One of the responses that you're getting from the Biden administration, who seems fairly confident that they will ultimately come down on the right side, although I might beg to differ at the Supreme Court level. But the argument you're hearing from them is that, more than 46 million Americans have been infected by COVID-19. This is just in 2 brief years. 750,000 of us have been killed by this virus. It is a sledgehammer that hits everything the same. It doesn't discriminate between the workers in terms of how it is transmitted. One of the problems with the debate that you are seeing comes down to what OSHA's actual prerogative is, and whether it is to protect just the workers at the workplace or the people that extend beyond that as a result of people going to work and doing business within these environments. I have said on here in the past, it may not really matter so much if the workers in the factory are safe. If the stuff coming out of the plumes at the top is giving everyone a disease or something like that, then OSHA is going to show up too, and a lot of other companies are going to show up too and say that that's going to have a consequence. I think that when it comes down to the courts, the Supreme Court, I think, is well set to be fairly conservative on this, to say that the administrative state is taking too large of a step. When at the very moment we have variants coming around, and the ability for these mandated vaccines to respond to those variants is still up in the air. So there's just a lot of uncertainty in terms of whether the government has the evidence that they need with the variants going around. I think that it's a very historic moment, and I think a lot of people are rightfully interested to see what kind of power the government has. The one last thing I want to say very briefly, I told my students when this began that this will be fascinating because you will see many of the same security moves that you saw when the so-called war on terror began. We're going to start tracking people in terms of where they're going, which potentially violates, privacy in terms of contract tracing and things like that. You're going to start seeing mandates and things like that. It's interesting that the courts are so skeptical about COVID-19, which has killed so many people, and yet we see such sweeping reform of our privacy and things like that when it comes to this so-called war on terror, which has not even close to the same kind of consequence.
Yeah, I think you bring up some interesting points. I hadn't heard people talk about the other sort of extreme uses of government authority when it comes to the post-2001 world, post-9/11 world, and even the more recent financial tax provisions in potentially in the social spending bill that would have required every financial transaction over $600 to be registered with the Treasury Department. So there are the Snowden revelations about turnkey tyranny. So the courts are pretty lenient when it comes to the topics that are of interest and concern to them. And you can't really, it's not polite to say it's a political process how courts determine what's going to happen, but everybody sort of knows from the history of the federal courts that they've always kind of been the perpetuating status quo social economic arrangements as long as they could until they couldn't. So just to circle back to that's I think a broadening of our topic, but just to kind of circle back to what's at stake. Is there a grave danger that could be argued? And I would say that yes. I know you pointed out the impact of 46 million people, more than 1,000 people dying per day, every day for a very long time. There's been an ebb and a flow, but it's 2 September 11th a week. For a long time now, when it comes to the deaths from this. So it's a very severe and significant thing. The question is the economic impact, economic liberty, I would say, of employers to determine their own workplace practices. And that's the rub. So will the federal government, will OSHA be able to reach that grave danger standard? Arguably, yes. I mean, from a lay person's perspective, I would say yes, but because I'm not a lawyer, not a judge. But the question is, when it gets to the Supreme Court, you alluded to this. This is picking up on your other point. Where would this be in the Supreme Court? What will they do? And there is a very sort of anti-federal power streak amongst the Federalist Society judges who now dominate the federal bench. Their goal is clear and overt: rein in the administrative state. And this is like an axe to grind that they just can't not do, in part because of the legal arguments, but also in part because of the sociological, the psychology of the electorate who is also pushing back on this. So it's like a really good fit for GOP sort of anti-Biden administration and anti-federal power under this president. Any last comments at all?
No, just to say that I'm glad you specified reigning in the administrative state, because the national security state continues to operate unabated by the courts. And I think that everyone should be concerned by that.
Congress must act. We cannot leave here to go home to our families.
We will not leave this town until we have voted, up or down, until we have voted on direct relief for working people.
Mr. President, you're very aware, because in the committee that we both sit on, we've worked through a process of trying to form an answer to a problem that is coming at us again in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we will hit the end of the fiscal year, which means the countdown clock will begin again towards when we're headed to another government shutdown.
All right, topic 2 for us this week is the House passing Biden's ambitious social spending package. We talked about this a little bit in the past. The House has passed the approximately $1.7 trillion Build Back Better budget reconciliation bill. It needs to go to the Senate for final approval. It's really unclear if, it sounds like a broken record here, but Senators Manchin and Senator Sinema are going to go along. We've been kind of saying all along they probably will once they get what they need, which has been things like removing elements of the bill out. That their constituents, their funders, their supporters, their backers have said, look, like let's not support this. So the Biden team and Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer, Speaker of the House Pelosi and Senator Schumer, I believe it to be the case. It seems to us they've been gradually pulling out the pieces that are most contentious, so that they could just get this done, because it still will be a big bill. It's not as big as everybody says. It's not as scary in dollar terms when you compare it as a percentage of GDP. It's like 1% or GDP or less. So it's really not. It's not a massive amount of money, although it's a big number. So it's scary. So the question is, congressional Democrats say it's going to have a profound impact on people's lives and the pocketbooks of most Americans. The GOP Republican dissent has been, this is a quote from Senate Minority Leader McConnell from Kentucky, the only way to keep inflation from getting worse would be to kill the reckless tax and spending spree. So this is basically framing this as some kind of like existential threat to the overall economy, whether it's micro, small dollars or macro, global. I think that they're not getting very technical. They're just saying like, if you print more money, sky is falling. Not to belittle that argument. I mean, there are just disagreements between economists, but like we talked about recently, like 17 Nobel Prize winning economists, or like top level people have said this is not too big, and it's a legitimate use of resources during a pandemic to rescue the economy from the potential stalling, ... And it gets very technical. But truth is, there's mixed messages here. Is the money going to be effective and useful and worth it, or do we need to block it because it's needless and reckless? And so there's been a new report that's out, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I'm curious, Aaron, to hear kind of based on how I framed it. What you weren't here last week. What's your takeaway of this making it through the House?
Well, one of the predictions I had on the show a while ago was that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party would balk, and that they would separate their demands, for the budget and for the social spending bill. I think it's worth talking about going forward, because we are going to talk about the Republican infighting. The Democrats suffer a lot more from this. This is a very popular bill. This is a bill that should have passed with flying colors, and yet we're going to be pulling teeth all the way through. And I think that really speaks to the kind of lack of cohesion that we continue to see from the Democratic Party on a bill that, again, should be fairly popular. You say that it's expensive because of the dollar amount, but when it comes to spending, I think everybody knows there's a difference between a good investment, a value-added investment, we will call it, and a bad investment. A bad investment is giving a bunch of billionaires money back and telling them that they can put that into the stock market and that they can return that to their own pocket as something called a capital gain, which then never finds its way back into the American economy. It goes offshore, it turns into a yacht or many yachts. This tax break approach that Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, George W. Bush, generations of Republicans have tried, has been proven again and again to cost the American taxpayer trillions of dollars. That's a plural, trillions of dollars. This money does not make its way back in, and yet they continue to allow the people that make the most in this country to pay the least. And when you do that, it costs us in a lot of ways. When it comes to this spending package, almost all of it is value added. When you look at family care, when you look at a lot of the climate change policies that they're passing, when you look at some of the infrastructure stuff that they're talking about, this is stuff that does change the life of everyday Americans, that changes our ability to earn, our ability to spend. That makes it when you give that tax money back to like actual people, when actual people have health care, when actual people are capable of going to work, that makes its way back into the economy. It's a good investment to spend on things like this.
So that's an incredible segue to the recent study. I think I saw a headline come out yesterday. I skimmed through the executive summary page of the study. I haven't dove into the nitty gritty yet, but it's a new report from the center left think tank called Third Way. And what they've basically done is taken just 4 of the main components of the spending bill and shown crunch the numbers for how much it would actually mean for families across the country. So the Biden administration has said, like, hey, we've got this bill, and to a lesser extent, the House, I think some House members have said, we've got this bill that's really going to help people. But they talk about the top line number, and they talk about the grandiosity, I guess is the word, of what's happening. This is, FDR, and it's a major investment. I'm sorry that I'm not remembering their buzzwords about how transformative. I think that's the word. This is a transformative spending bill. But most people don't even know what that means and how that's going to affect them, and they're used to the hyperbole. So this study from the Third Way, it's looking at the child tax credits, the child care cost caps, and the expansions to the Affordable Care Act, and finally also closing Medicaid coverage gap. That's just 4 components. And it's not that these are insignificant components, but they are controversial components. So a lot of the things we've heard, the pushback we've heard from Republicans, and also to a lesser extent Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, that these things might not be worth the money, might be worth the cost. Well, it turns out that the average family of 4 in America, like the median, the middle family in the middle state, would get about $7,400 per year for that family off these 4 provisions alone. And a single mother with 2 kids would receive as much as $15,000 per year from just those 4 components. So the case can be made that there will be a positive impact in people's lives that could offset their concerns.
And that money is going to go back into the economy. I don't know very many parents that throw that into capital gains and turn that into an offshore bank account. That's going to pay for food. That's going to pay for diapers. That's going to pay for fuel. That is what stimulates the economy, is that kind of payment. So if we can pass tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, we can pass tax cuts for American families that have kids facing inflation right now, because that will go back into the economy.
And while we're talking about it, I think it's an important point to make. We talked about it last week, but I think it's worth bringing up here. And I misspoke. I had originally heard it was the single largest line item in this bill, and that since then I've heard other people look at this and say, no, it's actually the second single largest line item in this bill. But it's called the SALT tax, which is the state and local tax deductibility. So on your federal income taxes, you can basically write off the amount of money that you spend on state and local taxes, which for most people who own a home and live in a wealthy state or a high rent zip code or census block, then those folks are actually going to be living in these houses that are extraordinarily expensive and pay extraordinarily high property taxes, and they'll have high enough incomes that those deductions will work for them. That number, it's nearly $300 billion. So of our $1.7 trillion bill, the moderate Democrats drew a line in the sand and said, we will stick together with the Biden administration and our progressive allies in the House and pass this bill out of the Democratic-controlled House if we get this at least $200+ billion component. I've seen people who say it's as high as 300, and it just depends on how you look at it, how you cut it, whatever. But still, one of the highest priorities for getting this through was that one piece, and it's going to a very, very small percentage of people, like top 10% in the country, and the people that benefit the most are even a much smaller percent. Top 1% would get the biggest chunk of that benefit, and they're even talking about where's the cap going to be. So we'll see how this plays out, but the argument can be made based on data and on facts. Like we talk about, we love to do crunch the numbers. The numbers have been crunched. Third Way's got a first pass at it. We just need to see how people can digest that information. The third topic is infighting amongst the Republicans in the House and also in the Senate. So first, let's talk about the infighting in the House, because it's a consequence of some cross-party fighting that occurred. It's like schoolyard stuff, and I'd hate to be so getting in the mud with these people, but it's an entertaining little story, and it's emblematic of kind of where things have devolved to in the House. So approximately a week ago, maybe a little bit longer ago, Representative Boebert from Colorado referred to Representative Ilhan Omar of Wisconsin as part of the Jihad Squad, and insinuating that she's a terrorist because she's Muslim and wears a hijab, which she does in this kind of like shtick that she does, where she's in a crowd of like-minded conservative folks who are kind of laughing a little bit, when going along just to kind of rip on the opposition of people that they disagree with. There are people who said, look, you ought not do that, including Nancy Mace, who's a representative from South Carolina. She said in effect that, like, look, we ought not go there. Our country is bigger than that. The House of Representatives should be bigger than that. And so, but Representative Boebert had some other GOP allies rush to her defense, including Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said that Nancy Mace was trash. So then Mace got back on the Twitter universe and sent some emojis, a bat, a pile of excrement, and a clown hat, and making the insinuations that she was bat crap crazy. So that's kind of the ebb and flow. Well, both leaders wanted to de-escalate this, and even House Minority Leader McCarthy made a call and said, I think it was to Nancy Pelosi, leader of the majority in the House, said, look, Representative Boebert wants to apologize. She's going to make a call to Representative Omar and put this away, because this is not becoming of representatives. But that did not end well. It devolved after both people demanded that each other apologize. And I would say that I don't want to get all into the weeds about what every little bit of the things that they disagreed about came out. And ultimately, Representative Omar hung up on her. The word that's in the press is like discontinued the call or something, but like she hung up on her basically, which is not cool, obviously. But look, that's where they were. They were fighting and they weren't happy and they got off the phone. So that's the stage that's set. I call this drama, and I hate to be the guy who like escalates this drama, but the problem is that now there's this conservative alignment. What was once the Tea Party is now sort of the Trump more extreme element. It's dividing the GOP, and so you've got the usual suspects that are being full of drama, and like Representative Gosar from Arizona, who did that video of killing AOC and attacking the anime video, attacking the president, etc. And also Matt Gaetz, who's got his own shtick going, where he gets up there and he's very talks down to leaders and generals, and kind of like this attitude of just gotcha and higher, holier than thou, even though he's got his own skeleton in his own closet. So there's this collection of folks. So yeah, that's kind of where it stands now. We'll talk about the impact of that, but there's this extreme side of the Republicans who are engaged in this food fight, and there's potential impact on them. So tell me what you thought about this kind of scrap.
I think I want to be as forward as I can about this. That when folks call someone like Ilhan Omar a jihadist, they're playing into histories of white supremacist violence in this country that continue to threaten people every single day. Valerie Carr talks about 2012, the Oak Creek massacre, how 7 Sikhs were shot up because they were wearing turbans and they were mistaken as Islamic fundamentalists. There's a long history of this. This happened April of this year in Indianapolis in this country. We can't forget that this happens every single day. When the Republican Party plays with this rhetoric, they know that there is consequence. It creates anger. It creates fear on the side of the people that they are talking about. And then you get a world where Ilhan Omar has to apologize for the way that she is responding. This is a profound legacy of white supremacy in this country that is very lopsided in its consequence. Republicans get mad when Democrats call them racist, or when Democrats say the attack on the Capitol was an attack on our country. And yet we have to fight to get an apology for something that is as flagrant as calling a sitting member of Congress a jihadist. it's really outrageous. And I think that the problem is that we tiptoe around the white supremacist racism that really underscores this kind of rhetoric way too much. The Democrats are fighting over how we should be taxing, a massive spending bill. This is what's dividing the Republican Party. The two parties could not be further apart in this country in terms of their priorities and the kinds of discourse that they want to put in front of the American people. And I think it's frankly pretty alarming to see that so many American people are aligning themselves with this kind of Republican mind.
Yeah, I think Aaron, those are points well taken. That this is kind of showing the priorities and the division, in the country writ large. But it also focuses a little bit on the differentiation within the Republican Party as well. I don't think that the moderates are too keen to embrace this for much longer, but they realize that like I said, it's dividing them. They only need 5 seats to take over the majority in the House. But they can't afford to lose an entire Trump wing of the party. So that's why they're stuck in this awkward situation where this alignment of, Trump-leaning conservative Republicans in the House have the ability to kind of veto Speaker McCarthy. And he could, they have a track record of fighting against him being Speaker in the past, or at least holding out and trying to resist that. And there's a chance that, if there's a big enough swing, he's not going to need them. But I highly doubt that's the case. I think any swing that comes in 2022, if it does happen, he'll need the whole big tent, and therefore he's beholden to kind of pay lip service or silence in the face of these things. We do also want to speak briefly about the government shutdown that could happen this Friday. It's not supposed to happen. GOP Senate Leader McConnell has said there will not be a shutdown, but he's got this small little faction led by Senator Lee from Utah. This small group of conservatives want to bar government funds for the Biden administration's COVID vaccine mandate as a condition for keeping the government open. He has the support of Senators Ted Cruz, Senator Johnson, and Senator Marshall from Texas, Wisconsin, and Kansas, respectively. Which, by the way, I said Ilhan Omar was from Wisconsin. She's from Minnesota. I misspoke on that. So sorry to Ilhan Omar. But in the Senate, this is not going to be a major contention. This is basically the quote, I think, from Senator Lee or one of his other allies was, we will need to show the people at home what we're fighting for. So in a sense, they're standing up and they're playing tough and they're saying, you know what, let's just let this whole thing fall apart. Let's shut this thing down. We don't want this mandate. But the moderate Republicans in the Senate are saying, look, the courts are already blocking the mandate. We're already getting what we want from the courts and through legitimate means of undermining the Biden administration's plan. Let's not shut down the government. It won't work well. It never works well, which is why I think that's what's going to prevail. But that's about it. We'll see what happens on this topic as it unfolds. Next week, we'll know if there was a shutdown on Friday, which I highly doubt. Our fourth topic this week is more drama. Trump's 2024 vice presidential tryouts are underway. So this is, again, I guess I'm sorry that we're in the drama mode, but this is relevant to people. This is what people talked about over Thanksgiving. I don't know about you, but around our table, we are like, so is he going to be president? Is he going to run? Is he going to run again? Well, he did not announce, so let's just make that clear. He's not announced he's running for president, and he's not going to until after 2022. And who knows, by then there might be all sorts of litigation that comes down on him and his family that pushes him out of the ring. But as of right now, we don't see that, right? Like there's no signs he's going to get pushed out. So therefore, there are lots of people already courting him, visiting him in Mar-a-Lago down in Florida, trying to line up to become vice president. So I'm gonna lay the stage here a little bit for you, Aaron, and see where you run with this. So based on drama, rumors, innuendo that you could find online, whether it's Politico or The Hill or any of these others, Trump will not be bound by geography, ideology, or other ticket balancing factors. So there are lots of people who are saying he doesn't need to do the traditional VP search because according to himself, he's already the party. And according to the party, they're just going to keep mum and let him do and say what he wants to do unless it's, for example, Representative Cheney from Wyoming. So very few people are actually in the party willing to speak out. And technically, the state party threw her out or refusing to acknowledge her as a Republican right right now because of her anti-Trump posturing in the January 6th committee. So what are Trump's criteria? Well, this is easy to guess. Loyalty and supporting the claim that the election was stolen. That's pretty much it. That's his litmus test. So there's a lot of room for people to come down to Mar-a-Lago and do their spiel. And the one that got the most press this week was Senator Scott from South Carolina, in part because he's really good at raising money, and in part because he was the first black senator from the South since Reconstruction. So he's got that going for him, that it's an expression of diversity within the party. One other one that's pretty prominent is Florida Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nunez, as a Latina. She also, and a woman, presents some diversity, and Trump likes that. He's also from Florida, and she's from Florida, which has its own sort of technical reasons why that might not be possible, but we'll leave that aside for now. And then finally, that gender balance issue. There's a couple other names that were thrown in there: Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn, all of which are fawning all over Trump and lining up to be his next VP. So, Aaron, it's not Pence, right? So what part of the drama is it's not Pence, and we know why. But why don't you take this and run with it? What do you think about Trump running for president and the VP stakes that are beginning way too early?
So Donald Trump is a legitimate force in American politics, and that was something that too many people had to learn the hard way last time. And I don't think we should make the same mistake again. The man was elected president. The man did unprecedented things as president of the United States, including very explicitly leading an attack on our Capitol, who was counting the votes of his successor. He specifically, organized and encouraged the march. And we can talk semantics about whether his rhetoric encouraged the attack or not. But he was, posturing very directly with these kinds of activities. The only thing that stopped that was Pence. That was it. If Pence had decided to go with Trump, then the story that day would have been very, very different. And I don't know how America would have fared. I don't know what would have happened. And I think that it's meaningful. It's deeply meaningful and very significant to see who the next running mate for Donald Trump could be, because I think he has a stranglehold on the Republican Party, and they have a very outsized shot of winning the presidency. The Electoral College stilts the conversation very heavily in very specific ways. I think that when it comes to the vice president, there are very few positions that are seemingly so mundane and yet so significant in the American, government apparatus. The vice president does a lot of things and gets situated in a lot of key ways. So I think it's a pretty substantial conversation. I do think Trump will run. I do not think it will matter whether there's legislation or not. In fact, many people think he's trying to seek safety inside the White House.
And just to probe you a little bit on this, what about all those cases out there that are pending against him, his children, his entourage, or people around him that are in the Manhattan District Court? Those are serious civil penalties. So there's that element of it, but then also possibly the January 6th committee could, in theory, speak to the right person about the right topic of who's in the room at the right time and sort of implicate him as the ringleader, et cetera. And do you think any of those things are going to stick?
The legacy of the American president is so important to the people responsible for these kinds of moves that I'd be really shocked. We have never had a presidential candidate barred from participating because of criminal activity. And when you say that out loud, people will say that sounds like that's something that happens in other countries, right? Like, America is a democracy that we have thought is supposed to be safe from that, because the parties have been more or less willing to look the other way in order to preserve the legacy of the shared institution. My guess is that will continue. I would be really shocked if Donald Trump were to face any kind of actual meaningful legislation. I do not think the January 6th committee is going to do it. I think that's primarily pro forma. The other stuff definitely could. The time frame then would be the question. And I think that Trump would just continue to play it up as the Biden administration trying to shut him down, a bunch of other incoherent arguments about how the deep state is trying to stop his presidency. And so, as righteous as those investigations are, it's deeply disturbing. It's frightening. It's the kind of thing that could bring Trump supporters to the polls to elect a known criminal.
Interesting. So even the attacks on him would even strengthen him, in other words, in that paradigm.
It plays into his story. I mean, his whole mythos is that he is an outsider, which is really amazing considering how much he says he's worth. But the point that the state is trying to stop him, that Pence is a traitor, that the election was stolen. I mean, it really bolsters that claim if he's the first president in history to face these kinds of incriminations, regardless of how justifiable they are.
So what about Governor Christie's new book where he basically says that this is all nonsense, the election being stolen was nonsense, et cetera, and he's kind of trying to help the party like plant a pivot in this, and shift away, not necessarily from Donald Trump himself. I don't think he actually really could do that, but he's trying to bring the public conversation back around that the election was carried out, within guidelines and rules and appropriately.
I think it's very Chris Christie. I think Liz Cheney did it better. I think there is a small modicum of people, or a small number of people in the Republican Party that might try to claim some semblance of sanity, but Chris Christie can't be that person spending the time that he spent standing behind Trump and working in lockstep with Trump and saying, as he does, that he would continue to support another Trump presidency. I don't know. I don't know that Chris Christie has a whole lot of sway in the Republican Party anymore. I think he's just selling a book.
Yeah, that's where I heard it. Yeah, when I've seen him speak on behalf of the book a few times, and it just like he was called out for a lot of the gaps, for example, criticizing CNN and MSNBC, but then not speaking anything, and also speaking out about misinformation and disinformation being harmful to the party, but then saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about that happening on Fox News. I don't know. I don't watch Tucker Carlson, so I don't know what he's doing." I think that was real disingenuous, and I think that sort of supports a little bit about what you said. Finally, we just have very limited time left on this topic. What do you think about Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, as his running mate?
Yeah, my prediction at the end, I'll spoil it now, is that I do think he'll pick a woman as a running mate. I think that's something he's going to do. I thought he was going to nominate one of his children for the Supreme Court, so that just shows you how wild I think he is. That wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't. I mean, it would be shocking, but it wouldn't be surprising.
Well, cool. Thanks for these. I didn't mean to put you on the spot with any of this stuff, but the fact that he's not bound by geography, ideology, or ticket balancing factors means it's wide open, and it's so far in the future that there's going to be people coming and going, I'm sure, between now and then. And I
think the math makes sense. I know we're on a button here for time, but I will say I do think the math will continue to play. Iowa matters. Iowa always matters, and the VP is there to bring votes. That's the first like math thing, and Trump is Trump, but he knows that. So
yeah, and that's pretty much where I was at too. So I'm glad we sort of see this. I thought Governor Kim Reynolds is the leader right now in this because of that very reason. He could go to Iowa as much as he wants between now and then.
We are living in a society where the very, very rich are getting phenomenally richer. Meanwhile, the working class of this country is struggling. You got 600,000 people who are homeless. You got parents who cannot afford childcare.
The game is to shrink the cost, start a whole lot of programs, and claim, look, this is just one more round of the kind of inflationary policies that they enacted earlier this year on a party line basis. They dumped almost $2 trillion on the economy, sent inflation through the roof, and they're not through. They want to keep on doing it with higher taxes and entitlement programs.
So I'm here today to talk about what's fundamentally at stake right now for the families and for our country. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by a significant margin because we invested in our people. We invested in ourselves, not only in our roads and our highways and our bridges, but on our people and our families.
Well, we're going to move on to our fifth topic and final topic for the week. This is the National Labor Relations Board orders Amazon to hold new union elections at their Alabama facility. So I think this was something that just doesn't seem like it's major news to some folks who see it. Oh, there's going to be a new union election, and that is a little bit out of context. Doesn't seem as important, but really there's been a whole flurry of union activity and labor activity, organizing, standing up for increased wages or other benefits. new contracts that aren't going to have like a discriminatory impact on new workers versus old workers. There's been a lot of that going on. I think there's a dozen pretty major labor events that have happened across the country over the last 9 months. In this story, Region 10 Director of the National Labor Relations Board, her name's Lisa Henderson. She came down with a ruling, finding on behalf of basically the Biden administration, saying that Amazon, in effect, disregarded the board's established mail-in procedure for voting and made a fair election impossible because they commissioned the Postal Service to put in a special union balloting mailbox on the premises of the plant. And they decorated it, they wrapped it in anti-union slogans, and they asked people how they were going to vote. And then the people that said they were going to vote against it were given, swag, basically anti-union swag to broadcast that they were going to vote against it. And Amazon even asked if they can get this mailbox on the property, and the guidance from the NLRB was no. So they were basically told not to do it. So they disregarded that. And the outcome of this first election was 1,798 to 738. So it was very lopsided in the sense that it's, about 1/3, not quite in favor. So it doesn't look like they have much of a chance. But the union did contest the outcome and said that this election was fraught with intimidation and interference, which, according to lots of testimony and evidence and reporting, and it appears to be the case that they are unabashedly and unashamedly intimidating and interfering, hiring union anti-union consultants to come in and give regular sessions talking about the benefits of keeping the union out of the organization, of the plant, and interviews with people there. Often they're saying, look, I don't want to rock the boat. I got a good wage. This is the best job in town. So, Aaron, I ask you, I'm kind of throwing you the softball. Tell us a little bit about the importance of this one event, but then also in the context of this, this sort of national transition for labor rights struggle.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos made the news when he went to space in a very peculiar looking rocket. And I think a lot of people know Amazon is a big deal, but don't know how big of a deal it is. According to one source, Amazon employs over 1.2 million full and part-time Americans. Business Insider says 1 in every 153 American workers is an Amazon employee. They are a commerce retailer worth $386 billion. Their value has shot up astronomically as a result of the COVID pandemic, and absolutely none of that has been shared with the workers that are doing the actual jobs of moving the packages and driving the trucks and making sure that the behemoth that is Amazon operates. I think that, as you mentioned, we're seeing this across the economy. We're seeing this at Activision, which is a video game manufacturer. We're seeing this at Starbucks, which most people have heard of. Workers are realizing that they are, in fact, essential. If workers don't go to work, then the business shuts down. The worker has more power in their pockets than the boss is ever going to have, we like to say in the union. And people are starting to realize this, and they're starting to realize that the economy is stacked against them, and they're trying to take the power into their own hands. Amazon's poll watching activities are classic. It's the same reason many people are so concerned about Republicans passing similar laws to enable poll watchers to go and intimidate voters in certain districts. Voting is risky. Voting is a risky thing, and people take risks when we go to vote, especially if we're being threatened by our bosses or our neighbors. And so that there are rules to protect voting places, and Amazon is literally making a joke of it. Like you said, I had to look it up myself. They literally wrapped the thing in their logo. They wrapped it in their logo. This is the kind of communication that mafiosos use. It's weird. As a rhetorician, I'm like, that's creepy. That is just a very weird way to communicate your priorities at this moment. Unions are controversial, but historically they're overwhelmingly necessary. If an organization the size of Amazon does not have unions, you will see rampant worker exploitation, and you do. You've got drivers peeing in bottles and things to get you your overnight package. This is necessary. If we believe basic economic history, it is inevitable. And Amazon knows it. They're just going to drag their feet as long as humanly possible and make it look like the workers' fault.
So I'm not going to speak to the horror stories that come out of Amazon. They're well documented, and anybody who wants to look them up can. Instead, I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit here to just the general disposition against the consideration of labor, their interests that exist in our country, and we've got a 140-year history of labor evolving alongside capital and the give and take, and it's a fascinating story, kind of how people are able to sort of modernize. The world is modernized. We love the advances of the capitalist system that we've got. Like we all carry around massively powerful computers in our pocket that let us talk and video chat with anybody in the world anytime. Like progress is great, but at what cost? And so finding that happy medium and that balance, I think, is what's important. So much of our labor has been exported outside of our country, in part because of environmental and other regulations, but probably most significantly because of labor and the relative power of labor here versus other less evolved labor systems like Southeast Asian systems. If I want to plug a movie, maybe you've seen it. It's called American Factory. I don't know if you have, but it's a Chinese company comes and buys a American glass factory in Ohio. There's a scene where there's many scenes that are revealing in this context, but there's a scene where they do like a ribbon cutting, and they have Senator Sherrod Brown come out and give this little speech about how how great it is that this has happened, that this is a great investment in the community. The community really appreciates this Chinese company coming in and taking over and restoring jobs to the community, etc. But then he goes on to say that he believes that they ought to be able to have a union if they want one. And the camera is filming the American employees in the crowd who are the managers, and they are having a fit. They cannot believe that he has this speech, basically. And one of the people actually says, "Who let him here? Who invited him? He doesn't belong here. We don't want him here. What the hell is he talking about?" And he's a senator. He's a sitting senator, and all he's saying is that what's the law? If these people want to try to get a union, I support that. Whatever he said was innocuous on the surface, but people flipped out. And then fast forward to later in the movie where the Chinese leadership flies over here and basically says, "I'm going to fire every one of you American managers if you can't keep these people in line. And we're just not having this." And it just shows that that's the climate that we have. Like if you look in the circle of the leadership of some of these companies, that's their peer group. Their peer group is like, don't even let them talk. Like don't even let them consider. Like we are not doing that. So that I'll let you get the last word here, but it's revealing about what the dialogue is at that level about how to consider people's actual lives and well-being.
Mm-hmm. They wouldn't be that concerned if a union was not effective. The only reason they're so concerned is because the union is effective and it will go against their best interest, which is to keep as much of the material wealth for themselves and to continue those systems of inequality. So I think that the only other note that I would make just very briefly is to say that the American culture enables this a lot. We devalue labor. I think that we all know custodians make our world go round. The people that serve us food make our world go round. The people that help us pay for gas to put in our car, this isn't a beginning job. This is an essential job. This is a job that we need. And those people deserve everything. They deserve everything that everyone else gets. And the fact that we overlook sanitation workers, custodial workers, food service workers in this country is a cultural problem that we can all do some inward thinking to try to address, but that is very readily solved by organizing tactics that you see from unions.
Our next and final segment is our predictions. So you kind of gave us a little bit of a teaser, but Aaron, what's your prediction for this week?
I don't think it will be the individual from Iowa whose name I totally just spaced that you read in the article, but I do think Trump is going to elect a woman. I don't think we know who she is yet. I do think it will be a crony. One of the articles I read is like it's going to be a kind of like a party person sitting at a state level that he wants that's loyal, or some kind of crony. someone that he just pulls up from his inner circle. So maybe Ivanka Trump is more likely.
Oh, goodness. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, was that even possible? How did he know?
Fingers crossed. I hope.
How did he know that we were going with Dynasty?
I want to be wrong more often than not, believe me.
So my prediction for this week is, just as we're getting into these final 4 weeks of the year, I know that the Democrats have a whole bunch of bills that they love to push through. So I'm gonna point to 3 of them. One is just funding the government, keeping it open, passing what they need to pass. That seems bipartisan, and that seems like it's going to happen. So I'm going to predict that does happen, that they pass the funding mechanism that they need, and they stay open. And then secondarily, they have to raise the deficit, the budget cap, so that if they don't get rid of that, then it's all going to be for naught in a very short period of time. They're still run into that problem of, do we mint the $1 trillion coin or don't we, et cetera. I would say they have to raise it. The Republicans are trying to make it so that the Democrats are on the hook for it. I think that they could do that, and that might work. And the Democrats will be on the hook, and they will do it. There's no alternative. If you're going to spend $770 billion a year on military, and $300 to $400 billion of it is debt, you have to be able to get that debt, or it's close to $10 billion a week that you can't spend, that you are already obligated to spend. So it's obligated. They have to raise it. And then finally, the Build Back Better bill, the budget reconciliation bill. Will it make it through the Senate? And I have to go out on a limb and say, yes, it will. I have to go out on a limb and say that there's so much that's been pulled out of the bill. There's been so much compromise already that ultimately Manchin and Sinema are on board, and they're going to make it happen, and probably before the new year ends. But, before the new year.
I really appreciate your optimism. That's what I need right now.
Okay, on that note, that's about going to do it for us this week. Until next week, everybody, this is Redwood Wonk. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening out there. And take care until next week.